Story 1. First off, this story occurred many years ago. Let me give you a rundown of the laws around divorce where we lived at the time. Both parties need to agree to the divorce unless one party can prove the other party is at fault. This would mean something akin to cheating. There are also other reasons, but cheating falls into this. Now, I honestly shouldn't have married my ex-wife, but I was young, dumb, and she was pretty, and I did what I did. So after our first year of marriage, I came to the conclusion I wanted to end our marriage. It wasn't working out for many reasons. However, my ex-wife did not want a divorce. Her life was better being married to me than without me, and I think she was trying to hold on to that. But there was no love. My ex-wife set a price of $100,000 to agree to a divorce. This does happen here, where if one party wants a divorce and the other doesn't, the party that doesn't want the divorce comes up with a cash payment they want, and you negotiate from there. Now, I didn't have $100,000. I could get about $25,000, and I was willing to pay that. Also, we had no kids. We didn't own anything Tochterek. We spent a long time going back and forth over money and how much I'd pay her to divorce me. She finally agreed. I was thrilled. I was so happy. I decided I would go out and celebrate, and that night the stars aligned. Now, to give you an idea of how utterly lucky I am about to get. We lived in a city about the size of Chicago, many millions of people, lots of places to go. My friend took me to a new bar in a part of the city I had never been to before. We celebrated. We had a good time. I walked out of the bar around 2:30 a.m., and it was like Christmas. There was my wife. With another man. I had a hunch she was cheating on me, and I was so happy. She was heading for a taxi, and I ran and got into a taxi behind her and told the cab driver to follow them. Much to my enjoyment, the taxi was clearly going to my house. She gets out, I pull out the camera, and I get a few pictures of her being intimately close to this man. Once I get the photos, I immediately email them to my work account to protect them, and I get out of the car and I approach the two lovebirds. I introduce myself, I thank the kind gentleman, and I make one request. If they want to have sex, don't have sex in my house. But that's all. I then hand her lover my business card. I thank him for all the money he's saved me and tell him if he ever wants to go grab a beer, I'd be happy to buy him a few rounds. I then wish the two lovebirds all the best and go upstairs and head to bed. To say my ex-wife was livid was understatement. However, the next morning, she pointed out something, and I have no idea how strong her argument could be in a courtroom. But it did concern me. She said since we already agreed to divorce, it wasn't really cheating, and I would still have to pay her. Well, that afternoon I got a phone call from my ex-wife boyfriend. He apologized for cheating with my ex-wife. I told him no worries. He then said he'd like to talk to me. We agreed to meet up, and we do. Turns out he had previously been cheated on, and apparently my ex-wife lied to him about his relationship status. She said we were waiting for our divorce to be finalized, which was not true, and that she didn't live with me anymore, which was not true. Their relationship had begun about 6 months prior, and she told him we were separated when we most definitely were not. Whoops! I asked him if he had any documentation of them dating, and he said yay. He ended up sending me all the pictures he took of them together. He also sent me numerous screenshots of text messages between her and him, some of which included her clearly lying about her relationship status with me. I put all of this in a folder and backed it up to numerous places to include a USB drive, which I hide in my office at work in case she found a way to delete the data, which she never did. I then went to my ex-wife and I sat down with her. I went over the mountain of evidence I had against her. Option A. She agreed to a non-contested divorce. I will give her 30 days to move out. She gets nothing from me, and I get nothing from her. Option B. I get a lawyer and I sue the living hell out of her, get a massive judgment against, still get my divorce, and saddle her with a ton of debt for the rest of her life. She agreed to the non-contested divorce. That was on a Saturday. That Monday we went to the courthouse, filed for divorce. This started her 30 days. I shacked up with my buddy so I could be out of her way. We had a court hearing a few weeks later. The judge made it clear we were doing a non-contested divorce. Once he stamps the divorce decree, we have to report this to City Hall, and our divorce will be finalized. Us not having kids or property make it quick and easy. We both agreed. We both signed. The judge stamped the documents. I eagerly grabbed my divorce decree and rushed to City Hall to report my divorce, and wham, bam, thank you ma'am, I was a free man. I actually ended up becoming friends with a guy that was cheating with my wife, and we still talk today. Although over COVID-19 pandemic, our relationship got distant, but not because of a falling out or anything, just not talking to each other. And that would be the end of this story. Hope you enjoyed it. Story 2. Some people believe the customer is always right, but this can be a problematic mindset. The reality is, customers can sometimes be entitled, yet employees are still expected to provide top-notch service. This becomes especially challenging when you encounter individuals who think they know more than they actually do. One day, a man walked into my department, and I greeted him with my usual enthusiasm. I'd always aimed to be Johnny on the spot whenever someone entered. "Welcome to our build-your-own department. I'm here to help. What are we putting together today?" I asked. He scoffed and replied, "A computer." Obviously, his tone was all attitude. He was wearing a My Chemical Romance shirt, extremely tight pants, and mismatched shoes, likely a deliberate style choice. Without focusing on his outfit, I assessed him quickly. My dad had taught me to get the measure of a person in a glance, and it had become second nature for me to use little tricks to remember details. In this case, I didn't react to his appearance, so I suspected the nearby hen group from the general section, who didn't work in our department, might have been behind his irritation. He seemed to think my smile was mocking him, so I feigned deafness, asking him to repeat himself. That relaxed him, as he assumed I hadn't heard the gossip. He handed me a list and said, "I don't want to be sold anything extra. Here's what I need, go get it." The list was thorough, with specific items and identification numbers. It looked like he was aiming for a full build, though I noticed many components were on the cheaper side. I told him it would take a few minutes and invited him to look around in case he found anything else he might need. He retorted that he wasn't buying anything else and warned me not to try any of that sales talk. I joked, "Oh, but it's so good for the joints and muscles." He wasn't amused, so I simply went to gather his items. As I gathered the components, I realized he had chosen parts based solely on price, without regard for compatibility. For example, he picked a processing unit designed for one manufacturer, but a motherboard for another. The case he wanted was too slim to fit the graphics card he'd selected, and his power supply was insufficient for the system's needs. I wondered if he even knew what he was building. I returned to him with the items and reviewed each piece, getting his approval as I went. I asked if all these parts were meant for the same build. He responded sarcastically, "Wow, how observant of you." I tried to inform him that some components wouldn't work together, but he cut me off. "Listen, I don't need you to try to upsell me. I've been building computers for years. I know what I'm doing." I doubted his claim but held back from questioning him. Instead, I asked if he wanted to hear about our return policy, just in case. He became defensive, telling me he knew what he was doing and accusing me of judging him based on his appearance. I confirmed he wasn't interested in the return or extended warranty policies. Warranties were something we were required to mention, but I figured he wouldn't appreciate the suggestion, so I moved on. I then double-checked his list, took a photo of it, and his items, knowing he'd likely be back soon. Sure enough, 2 days later, he returned. This time, he brought his sister, a young woman interested in building a gaming computer to play a specific high-performance game. I'll admit, at that time, I was surprised a girl would be interested in a game like that, so I directed my question to him. His sister clarified it was her build, and I realized she often faced skepticism for being a gamer girl. I admitted her previous build would not support the game well. He handed me a new list, insisting again not to upsell him. I reviewed the list and quickly noted this setup wouldn't meet the game's requirements. Politely, I suggested he check the game's specifications online, which could help guide his choices. He dismissed my advice, insisting he'd already done his homework. Looking to his sister, I offered to design a more affordable setup that would run the game decently. He interjected, saying he'd find another salesperson if I didn't comply. As I gathered his parts, I overheard him on the phone, revealing his real intention to spend as little as possible on the build and keep the remaining funds for himself, which seemed pretty low, but not my business. I gathered his requested items, knowing he'd likely return. 2 days later, he was back, this time with his parents in tow. They explained that they had trusted their son because he was supposedly good with computers, but that the setup wasn't working properly. His sister's birthday had already passed, and they were still without a working build. His parents mentioned they had a budget of $3,000, which they'd initially considered spending on a pre-built high-performance gaming computer, but their son had convinced them to build one instead. I asked if they wanted a setup within that $3,000 limit, and they agreed, leaving the decision-making to me. I then set out to build a setup that would make their daughter's gaming experience great. Piece by piece, I explained why each part was necessary, while her brother grew increasingly annoyed. I constructed a solid build for around $2,700, including a quality warranty and assembly service. If he hadn't been so rude initially, I could have saved him the embarrassment and helped him keep some change. Instead, his sister received a setup that exceeded her expectations, complete with a custom case in her favorite colors. The moral of the story: don't be rude to the people helping you. If you're honest about what you want, most salespeople will work hard to accommodate you. Or, at the very least, know what you're doing before making demands. In the end, I'm glad things worked out for her, and this time, there were no returns. Story 3. So for a bit of context, I'm a management consultancy contractor, which for most people means I'm a generalist with 1 or 2 specializations. Unfortunately, this is not the case since I'm actually an ex-management consultancy executive, which means I have corporate HR and legal training, which is important later. This happened about 8 years ago. I was working on a massive organizational transformation program involving 80,000 staff, with my part covering 40,000 staff. As you can imagine, it's really critical to get buy-in and have high levels of engagement with the staff through a team of consultants with professional behaviors. One of the key aspects of this new way of working was that it should be adopted through a team that embodied the new way of working, and that was our strategy. As part of my work, I needed to build out a team because frankly there was no way I could do all the work by myself. I have a rule: everyone works, no hierarchy. Even if I had extra duties, I would not ask others to do things I would not do myself. I was fortunate to internally hire a few people, all contractors coming to the end of their existing contracts, who knew the score that as a contractor we work really hard and are focused on completing work, not serving time. I also met a person I will call Ms. Awesome. She basically ran the whole program as a PM in the PMO office. I'd helped her rebuild all the reporting in Day as they had moved Jira versions and expected her to know the new version. Not my job, but I'm a team player and Jira admin. She in turn suggested her boyfriend for one of my open roles. Let's call him Mr. Awesome. He was, as the title says, a great consultant, thoughtful, creative, and open to learning, as we all should be. As part of this drive, I was given a perm member of staff we can call Gail. She talked about a great game, but clearly did not understand the mechanics of change or what we were trying to do. Also, she was unaware that her role was being demised at the end of the year since her skill set was that of a personal assistant and she was not technical. Finally, we get to the ep. Let's call her Karen. It is, after all, her real name. Gail hired her in without telling me, which of course was a big red flag. However, I work with people, handing out rope to see what they do with it. So I get feedback from everyone. It's part of our new way of working, to have daily calls and to take feedback at the executive level across the whole transformation. Clearly, everyone has an agenda, and personal likes or dislikes can color what people say. However, actions are very hard to hide. I was not present at the incident, but since there were raised voices involved, I heard about it pretty quickly, from multiple witnesses, but not from anyone involved. As the accountable person, it means I have to investigate. hear everyone's perspective and decide what is best for my client, their reputation, and of course the health of the transformation. First, I email Karen to ask her about the incident and ask her to explain what happened and why I had not been told about it. Her response was that she worked for Gail, that she did not report to me, and that it was none of my business. I was surprised with this response since it was so defensive, and all of it was wrong. Everyone in the team was coming out of my multi-million-pound budget. Okay, note to self: catch up with Gail on a couple of points. Same email to Mr. Awesome. He explained that Karen had tried to order him to do some of her work. He explained to Karen that he was busy with work I had set him. She became aggressive and told him that she worked for the perm Gail, and that if he did not do as she said, she would get him fired. He refused. I sent another email asking why he had not told me, and he said he did not want to make things worse. I asked him to keep notes on any further engagement with Karen or Gail. At this point, I had done the baseline investigation, so I contacted our HR business partner for advice. It's really important to create data points because at this point I was not sure what had happened or why, regardless of what I had been told. Next, I contacted Gail because she had hired Karen. I asked about what had happened and Karen's belief that she did not work for me. Gail confirmed that Karen had told her that Mr. Awesome had been aggressive when she asked for help, and that she was happy to work this through with Karen and Mr. Awesome. I think she was really surprised when I said no. I had previously asked for Karen's CV, but had not arrived. I now formally requested it as part of the investigation. She complied as she could see where this was going. It turned out that Karen had no skills or experience related to the work she was being asked to do by me through Gail, and it transpired that Gail was using her as a PA. For context, a contact PA was on 150 pounds a day and Karen was on 600 pounds a day as Gail had got her this job. The fog was becoming clearer. Now Karen was being put on the spot to cover up the fact that she did not know how to do the work. Unfortunately, because I had conflicting stories, the next step was to interview everyone involved. I first requested a chat with Karen. She found excuses to not have the meeting. Mr. Awesome arranged one ASAP. I had my meeting with Mr. Awesome. He did not embellish anything, but was quite disturbed by the threat to his job by Karen. I informed him that neither Karen nor Gail had any such authority and that HR had been engaged regarding the incident. He looked relieved and asked about what happened next. I advised Karen the same opportunity to give her side and then speak to the witnesses. Over a 2-week period, I tried to nail Karen down to a meeting every time she came up with an excuse about a meeting or a call, which I knew to be a lie since I could see her calendar. Given this behavior, I contacted HR again and advised of my experience so far, Karen's behavior and lack of professional skills. They advised that I terminate her contract and have a member of security on the floor should they be needed. I finally managed to get a meeting with Karen. Gail was present. However, Karen would not come into the meeting room. At this point, I was still willing to work with her, but unfortunately she aggressively told me from the open plan office space I had no authority over her. I expected it to be a great show from the main office. I invited her into the room, but she refused again. At this point, I'd had enough. I called a security guard and then told her to put her ID card on the desk and that she would be escorted out of the building. And this is when it went nuclear. She went insane, shouting and cursing just in time for the security guard to arrive. He took her ID pass, would not let her pick up the work computer, and escorted her from the building. Mr. Awesome and MS Awesome were in the open plan office space and saw everything. Gail just carried on as if nothing had happened. Story 4. My boy, full of life and curiosity, had always been drawn to stories of brave swordsmen and their epic battles. I saw the fire in his eyes whenever he listened to those tales, so it wasn't a surprise when he asked me if he could learn swordsmanship himself. He was just a young lad, barely tall enough to see over the counter at the bakery, but his determination was strong. One day, after school, he came home and said, "Mom, I want to learn how to use a sword, like the heroes." I couldn't help but smile. "Well, my little hero, if that's what you want, we'll find a way." After some searching, I discovered a kendo dojo nearby. It seemed like a good fit, a place where he could learn discipline and honor along with his sword skills. And so, we found ourselves stepping into the dojo for the first time. The atmosphere was thick with the sounds of wooden swords clashing and the shuffling of feet. My boy's eyes widened with amazement as he watched the students practice. A kind-looking instructor approached us. "Interested in enrolling your son?" he asked with a friendly grin. I nodded. Yes, he's really excited about learning. From that moment, our routine began. Every week, I would bring my boy to the dojo. He'd don his uniform with a beaming face. The other students were welcoming, and soon he had friends to share his passion with. I remember the first time he picked up a wooden sword. He held it with such grace. During training, his focus was on point, his movements surprisingly fluid. The instructor and the other parents praised his skills. "He's a natural," one parent commented to me during a practice session. "You must be so proud." I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. My boy was indeed talented, and his excitement was a joy to witness. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But life has a way of shaking things up a little bit. One evening, as I watched my son spar with a fellow student, something unexpected happened. During a swift exchange of strikes, my boy's foot caught on a mat, and he stumbled. At that moment, his opponent's wooden sword accidentally struck him on the wrist. I rushed to his side, concerned. The instructor and the other parents gathered around. "Are you okay, baby?" I asked. He nodded, but with pain clearly written all over his face. The instructor apologized profusely, but accidents happen. We knew that. After the incident with my boy's wrist, we pressed on with our visits to the dojo, as his wrist had healed nicely. But little did we know that a storm was brewing, and its name was Karen. One day, as we arrived at the dojo, I noticed a woman with an air of arrogance about her. She had a child in tow, a boy who seemed to share his mother's entitled demeanor. It didn't take long for the whispers to spread among the other parents Karen had enrolled her brat in our dojo. From the start, Karen made her presence known. She marched up to the instructor, interrupting his class mid-sentence. I couldn't believe what I was hearing as she offered her unsolicited advice on how he should be teaching. My fellow parents exchanged looks, and eyebrows were raised in disbelief. As the weeks went on, Karen's interference became a regular occurrence. She'd shout instructions from the sidelines during sparring matches, acting as if she knew better than the senseis who had dedicated their lives to teaching martial arts. I remember one particularly cringe-worthy moment when she yelled, "Darling, you're not holding the wooden sword properly. Let me show you how a real warrior does it." But it wasn't just her interjections during class that irked us. Karen's arrogance extended to her interactions with other parents as well. She'd often boast about her son's exceptional talent and how he was destined for greatness. One afternoon, as I sat on the sidelines watching my boy spar, Karen plopped down next to me. "You know, my little boy has a natural gift for this. I'm thinking of suggesting a few changes to the sensei to really bring out his potential." I looked at her, struggling to maintain a polite expression. The senseis here are highly skilled and experienced. They know what they're doing. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I'm sure they're good, but a fresh perspective can do wonders, you know?" I exchanged a knowing look with another parent nearby, rolling my eyes once Karen had turned her attention elsewhere. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the dojo grew thicker. The sensei's patience was wearing thin, and the parents were growing increasingly fed up with Karen's antics. The tension caused by Karen's entitled behavior continued to simmer. But there was a new development, the announcement of a 1v1 small tournament among the kids. The day of the matches arrived, and the dojo was buzzing with excitement. I watched as my boy stepped onto the mat, wooden sword in hand, ready to face off against his fellow students. After a couple of intense matches, it was time for my boy to face Karen's brat. The match was fierce, both boys displaying their skills, and in the end, it was my boy who got the win. The room erupted in cheers and applause, fellow parents patting me on the back and congratulating my son. I watched him as he bowed respectfully to his opponent. But during all of that, Karen's shrill voice cut through the cheers. "This is ridiculous. That match was rigged. Your kid cheated." I couldn't believe my ears as she continued to spew accusations. Other parents exchanged looks, clearly fed up with her nonsense. The senseis tried to defuse the situation, calmly explaining that the match had been fair and closely monitored. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She stormed toward the small arena, with a furious expression. I watched as she berated my boy. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Cheating to win? You should be ashamed." My son was shocked. I stepped forward, ready to intervene, but then something unexpected happened. Karen's outburst had escalated far beyond what any of us could have imagined as she snatched the wooden sword from my boy's hand, raising it with a chilling intent to strike. In that split second, time seemed to slow down for me as my own body moved to intervene. But I knew I wouldn't make it in time to shield my son from her attack. It felt like a nightmare unfolding in front of my eyes. But just when it seemed that all hope was lost, the Sok, the Grand Master of the dojo, appeared out of nowhere. And he swiftly stepped between Karen and my son. I watched, breathless, as he used a wooden sword to block Karen's strike. Karen, with a wild look in her eyes, she shifted her attention from my son to the Grand Master himself and tried to attack him instead. And then, in a series of swift, impressive moves, the Sok disarmed her. The wooden sword fell from her grasp. But she wasn't done. She charged at him, raising her hands, trying to get a piece of him. But he used his own sword to strike certain pressure points on her body. It was as if he knew exactly where to hit to disrupt her balance and leave her incapacitated. Finally, she crumpled to the ground. The Sok turned to me, his expression softening as he saw the fear in my eyes. He nodded, a reassuring gesture that told me everything would be all right. All the parents gathered together, looking worried and surprised. We saw the police coming into the dojo with serious faces. When Karen was put in handcuffs and taken away, everyone in the dojo let out a sigh of relief, including the instructors. When it was my turn to talk to the police, I explained what happened before Karen was arrested. I talked about how scared I was when she raised the wooden sword and how relieved I was when the Grand Master stepped in. The police listened to us and collected information, and eventually the cameras supported our story, and Karen was eventually taken away out of there in a police car and a pair of shiny handcuffs. So yeah, that day I left with my son, holding his hand a bit tighter, thankful that he's safe despite everything awful that happened. Story 5. This happened a few years ago. I used to work as a detective for a local police department, now retired, and this occurred while I was still employed there. Throughout my career, I've always strived to stay on the right side of the law, as I consider hypocrisy to be one of the worst traits an officer can have. I owned a nice ski boat and enjoyed taking my family to the local lake to relax, tube, water ski, swim, and have a good time. My kids, who were 12 and 13 at the time, absolutely loved it and wanted to go almost every day I had off during the summer. One day, while we were at the lake, my daughter mentioned she needed to use the restroom. The lake had a public swimming beach with facilities, so we would occasionally pull up to shore, well away from the marked swimming area, to take bathroom breaks. On this particular day, as we pulled up, I noticed a woman sunbathing on a lounge chair near where we usually docked. I kept a respectful distance of about 50 feet from her and 250 feet from the swimming area, slowly maneuvering the boat toward shore at an idle speed. As we approached, she stood up, glaring. My kids recognized her as a former lunch lady from their elementary school, known to be rather unfriendly. As I brought the boat closer, the woman started loudly accusing me of breaking the law. I smiled politely and asked, "Really? What law?" She continued shouting, saying I was driving a motorboat in a swimming area. I pointed out the designated swimming area 250 feet away, asking, "You mean that area over there?" She replied, "Yes." I explained that I hadn't entered the swimming area and that the spot where my boat was currently docked was as close as I ever got. She claimed the law prohibited boats from docking at any shore. I wondered how one was supposed to get in or out of a boat otherwise, and announced that she was calling her son, a deputy, who would make sure I got in trouble. At this point, I started to find the situation amusing, assuming her son, the deputy, would tell her she couldn't prevent me from docking the boat responsibly. She called someone on her cell phone, reading out my boat's identification number, which is like a license plate for boats. Then, with a smug look, she said, "My son is going to order you off the lake right now." And then she did something surprising. She called me by my full name and handed me the phone. Now, what she had just done was a clear violation of the law. In my state, it's known as a law enforcement information network violation. Officers are frequently charged with this offense, and I read about it several times a year. If an officer uses their police computer to share personal information without proper cause, like telling a family member the name of the registered owner of a boat, that's a crime. Every officer is aware of this. I took the phone and immediately asked, "Who is this?" The person on the other end identified himself as Deputy so-and-so from the county sheriff's office. I interrupted him. "Deputy, do you know what a law enforcement information network violation is?" Silence followed. I repeated, "Deputy so-and-so, are you still there?" He responded, "Yes." I continued, "Deputy so-and-so, let me ask you again. Do you know what a law enforcement information network violation is?" He stammered something about boat registration numbers and public records. I replied, "No, that's not what a law enforcement information network violation is. Since you're unclear on this, should I remind your supervisor what it entails?" Silence again. I said, "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to hand the phone back to your mother. You're going to instruct her to leave this beach right now, and then we can forget this ever happened. Understood?" After a long pause, I repeated, "Understood?" He finally sighed and said, "Yeah, okay." I handed the phone back to his mother, who whispered a few words into it, then snapped her phone shut, packed her things, and left without making eye contact. I considered reporting him, but technically, I was the one affected by his actions, and I didn't feel particularly victimized, so I let it go. I only saw the woman once more at the beach, and she immediately packed up and left when she saw me. Edit not for those with predetermined views on law enforcement. When I'm off duty, I'm a citizen like everyone else, whether people like it or not, and I'm grateful for that distinction. I've never been one to make much of the thin blue line philosophy. While on duty, I've reported both an officer and a dispatcher who broke the law, the dispatcher for a similar violation, both of whom were subsequently fired. The officer is still serving time. As a detective, I even prosecuted an officer for a serious offense, ultimately getting a confession and a felony conviction. I take pride in those actions, for those wondering. However, every citizen, including law enforcement officers when off duty, has rights. I'm entitled to choose when I report an incident if I don't feel victimized. Some might call that hypocrisy, but we all have the right to make that choice. I'm always ready to pursue justice when I genuinely feel victimized, but I won't be pressured into creating a grievance just to satisfy someone else's views on what I should feel.